After a disappointing 2023 NFL season, the Philadelphia Eagles have retooled and reshaped their roster to look a whole lot better heading into the 2024 season. And I believe with this retooling, they are one of the scariest teams and arguably the best team in the NFC heading into the 2024 season. So today, let's talk about the Philadelphia Eagles and why they may just be the best team in the NFC. So the way we're going to be doing this video is by breaking it down into a few segments. We'll start off with talking about why this team could be the best team in the NFC next year. Then we'll talk about the opposite, why they may not be the best team in the NFC, to give you guys some different perspectives. And then at the very end, we'll talk about my personal synopsis and where I think this Philadelphia Eagles team lands. So to begin our first section, I think it's very fair that we start talking about the general talent that has already been established on this roster. We're talking about guys like Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, the whole offensive line, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, and Darius Slay. Those are guys who prior to the season ending were already on the roster and already Pro Bowl and All-Pro level players. I think it's very fair to say that before the downfall of their 2023 season, they were all having very phenomenal years. Jalen Hurts was an MVP candidate. AJ Brown was on pace to have his best year statistically. Darius Slay was still looking like the guy in the secondary. Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter were looking fantastic up the middle, and of course the offensive line dominated. But then the coaching staff got exposed for running a high school system both offensively and defensively. So that's not really on the talent. They struggled last year. I think a lot of the blame has to go primarily on last year's regimes of offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators. It's not very fair to blame Jalen Hurts for the downfall of the team when he was throwing a screen or running the ball every other play. Now, do I think that the coaching staff got a lot of the blame for the lack of personnel problems on the defensive side of things? Somewhat, yes, but at the same time, I think the defensive coordinators were also running some terrible schemes as well. Like, yes, does this team have issues or had issues in the secondary and in the linebacking room last year? Yes, they 100% did. But there's certain ways that you could work around the issues you have in your secondary and in your linebacking room. And many defensive coordinators, especially some of the top tier ones, would have made the adjustments the second week that they had issues with their defense, but they couldn't. And unfortunately for this Philadelphia Eagles team, because of how poor the defense was performing, it would end up affecting the offensive side of things. Because when the offense wasn't scoring 50 points, they were going to lose the game, and hell, even when they were on fire, they were still going to lose the game. And that was primarily because of the defensive issues they had because of the coaching staff. But just pure talent alone, this roster has every piece that any team would love to have. Again, if you look up and down this Philadelphia Eagles roster, you see talented player after talented player after talented player. And we're not just talking about being good enough to be, a decent player in the NFL. We're talking about all pro and Pro Bowl level guys. AJ Brown is a top 10 wide receiver in the league. Devontae Smith is arguably the best number 2 option in the NFL. Dallas Goedert, top 10 tight end. Their offensive line, probably the best or second best offensive line. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, some of the top players in their respective position. Darius Slay, still somehow a top cornerback in the league. So it's very fair to say that just the roster alone prior to any moves they made this free agency and in the draft was good enough to get the job done. But then they supplemented their already talented roster with a fantastic free agency and draft. We'll start off with the free agency and talk about the bigger playmakers that may happen on this team. They start off by getting Devontae Parker to be their receiver 3, Saquon Barkley to be their starting running back, Bryce Huff to be another edge rusher next to Josh Sweat, Devin White, who's going to be an impact linebacker for this team. They also got CJ Gardner-Johnson, not to mention they did get a couple other guys like a Mekhi Becton, for example. So there's a lot of players to talk about. I don't want to talk too much into detail about every single player, so we'll just kind of go briefly for each player real quickly. Saquon Barkley, obviously when healthy, is a top running back in the NFL. I think if they use him on every single play and make him a dynamic running back behind this offensive line, there's a very good chance he could have his best year of his career. My questions for Saquon Barkley is, have the injuries caught up to him yet? Is he going to be able to stay healthy? And will his impact be greater than what DeAndre Swift's was last year? Obviously, they're two different running backs with two different styles, but I just wonder if he's going to be able to fit this Philadelphia Eagles system a little bit better than DeAndre Swift. Devontae Parker will likely be their wide receiver 3, a big body wide receiver who last year for the New England Patriots definitely did struggle, but it's hard to really put a lot of the blame on him when he has Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi throwing the football to him. I don't know what level of production he's going to be able to get this year because of the already established AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, but if he can get them 400, 500, 600 yards, I think they'll definitely take that. Hell, last year their starting wide receiver 3 would have been technically Julio Jones at certain points last year, so Devontae Parker is a clear upgrade over that. On the defensive side of things, Bryce Huff brings a unique tool on the defensive line, somebody who didn't receive a ton of work and a ton of play for the Jets, but when he was on the field was an uber productive player. We're talking about somebody who could easily have 10 sacks a season for this Philadelphia Eagles defense. My question for Bryce Huff is going to be what he can necessarily do on the run defense side of things. Like on first down, is he going to be able to be good enough in run defense to stay on the field? If not, I don't think it's that big of a deal because you do have some other options like a Milton Williams or a Brandon Graham who can also fit in on first or second downs, and then you could throw Bryce Huff on obvious pass down situations. Devin White is a bit of a hit and miss type player. Like last year, he was getting benched at certain points in the season, but we obviously know that Devin White is a very good player regardless. This is a linebacker room that last year was god awful. They couldn't make a tackle. They couldn't read a play. It was just really bad play from them last year. So they went out there and they brought in a guy like a Devin White, who I do think will be the starter for this team next year. I don't know if he solves all their issues because he still has issues of his own, but at the bare minimum, he's way better than what they had last year. They also are going to be, by the way, getting Nakobe Dean back from injury. I don't know if he's anything special, but it's better than what they had last year. Then on the safety room, they decided to bring in CJ Gardner-Johnson back. This is an interesting player who, when thrown in for this Eagles defense, was a super dynamic player who got them a ton of interceptions. He could play on the nickel. He could play on the safety position. He can even play outside corner if you need him to. He's just a tool that this defense was missing last year because they needed somebody who can make some big time plays, who was also a very strong tackler. CJ Gardner-Johnson can be that guy. Looking into the draft, we're only going to be talking about the big impact players that I expect to make impacts this upcoming season. Starting off with Quinion Mitchell, who was our first overall pick. This was a home run pick. I was shocked that he was available for the Philadelphia Eagles to take. We're talking about somebody who has the range, who has all the gifts and abilities to be something special in the league. Down there in Toledo, he wasn't really asked to go up against anything special, but when he went into that Senior Bowl, he dominated every single person in front of him, regardless of what school it was. In year one with the Philadelphia Eagles, he's going to be playing alongside a guy like Darius Slay, who honestly he plays pretty similar to. I don't expect him to go in there and just blow everyone away because obviously the talent gap between the college level, especially at Toledo, and the NFL level is completely different. But I do think by the time the season is over with next year, we're talking about somebody who has the chance to be their cornerback one heading into the 2025 season. Their second overall pick was going to be Cooper DeJean, a guy who I was shocked to see him fall into the second round. I thought he was a pretty easy target in the first round. He's got outside corner and slot corner and safety versatility. I think for this Philadelphia Eagles defense, I honestly would love to see him play in that strong safety position. Have your secondary look like Quinion Mitchell on the outside, Darius Slay on the outside, CJ Gardner-Johnson as sort of your nickel back, then Cooper DeJean and Reed Blankenship as your two strong and free safeties. Cooper DeJean has really good skills. He just doesn't have, in my opinion, the athleticism that you would want to guard a guy like a Marvin Harrison Jr., which obviously we saw a few years ago and he got exposed by them. With that being said, though, he still has all the tools in the toolbox that you would want from a secondary member. A good tackler, a strong tackler, a physical player, somebody who can reroute guys. And when you need him to lock down, he can lock down anybody. But now we've talked about the good. Let's go ahead and talk about the bad for this Philadelphia Eagles team. I'm going to try to keep this as quick as possible so I don't keep you guys for too long. So when you look at this roster up and down, the talent is there. But what was the thing that held them back last year? It was their coaching staff. And to me, that is still somewhat a bit of a fear of mine. And that's mainly because, well, Nick Sirianni is still their head coach. Now, honestly, I did want them to keep Nick Sirianni as their head coach because you can't just fire somebody after having a couple bad games on the back end of last year. So they decided to keep him, but they did fire their offensive and defensive coordinators, which I did think were the right moves. To replace their offensive coordinator, they brought in Kellen Moore. We'll talk about him specifically because I really did not like that hire. And then on the defensive side of things, they brought in Vic Fangio, which is somebody who ran a very similar system to them as they did in 2022 and of course last year, but he's a little bit more of a seasoned veteran who's more willing to adapt. I thought that was a pretty solid hire overall. One more note on the Vic Fangio thing, that's a defense that does require a lot from the linebackers and they just don't have the guys in my opinion. We'll talk about the linebackers here in a second, but just keep an eye out for that next year and hopefully it can be an issue that is not that big for this Eagles team. But looking at Kellen Moore specifically, I really did not like this hire. If you've seen any of my past, I think 2 videos I made on the Philadelphia Eagles, I made it very clear that I do not like the Kellen Moore hire. Now, I'm not going to go into major specifics because again, I've already talked about this. It feels like a couple times already on this channel. But the main reason why I don't love the hire is I just don't think he fits the personnel of the Philadelphia Eagles. The personnel of the Philadelphia Eagles is a run-first design team. You have this great offensive line. You now have Saquon Barkley. But the thing is with Kellen Moore is he's never really been a dominant running guy. Even when he had prime Ezekiel Elliott, he still relied on Dak Prescott to throw the ball 30 to 40 times a game. And last year when he had Austin Eckler basically became unusable at times because of Kellen Moore's system. Now, I'm not blaming Kellen Moore for all the shenanigans that went down there with the Los Angeles Chargers because that was a team that was pretty bad overall. And, well, Austin Eckler isn't the greatest running back in the world, but the system hasn't really changed for Kellen Moore. Yes, I know statistically he's had these fantastic seasons with the Dallas Cowboys where that offense ranked in the top 5, but I also think it's very noteworthy that we put a little bit of some context on those offenses. because those were offenses that were ridiculously talented. But those were also offenses that were never able to get the job done when it mattered most. When it was playoff times, who lost the game for the Dallas Cowboys? It was not the defense, it was Kellen Moore in that offense. And why did they struggle to win those games against the San Francisco 49ers, which were back all the way in 2021 and 2022? Well, it's because the offense had no ability to run the football. And that's despite the fact that they had a good offensive line, they also had some pretty good running backs, they still did not decide to run the football at a consistent rate. Instead, he relied on Dak Prescott and, well, what was once Justin Herbert, and now he's going to now become the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm concerned that might become the same thing yet again. Now, the one caveat to that little issue I have with this team is that Kellen Moore has every incentive in the world to run the football. He's got a fantastic offensive line, he's got freaking Saquon Barkley, and he also has Jalen Hurts. So we'll have to wait to see if he actually does decide to run the football, but I'm just a little bit concerned that what he runs and his schemes and his play designs aren't going to match what the Philadelphia Eagles are good at. With that being said though, if he lets Jalen Hurts do what Jalen Hurts does and what he did with Shane Steichen, I will like this hire, but until I see it, I'm not a big fan of this hire one bit. The next thing is more of a personnel issue I have with this roster. It's going to be their linebackers and their edge rushers. Right now, I just don't know if I can trust a tandem of Josh Sweat and Bryce Huff consistently right now. When you're with Bryce Huff and you're on the New York Jets and they don't trust you to play over 50% of snaps on the field, that's kind of a glaring issue, especially when you see his statistics. So yes, I think Bryce Huff is going to be a fantastic pass rusher for the Philadelphia Eagles, but one of the issues this Eagles team had last year was their inability to stop the run, and I wonder if Bryce Huff is going to be able to do that next year. Josh Sweat is obviously a consistent staple of this defensive line, so he's going to continue to be a starter and probably take a big step forward next year, but the depth behind those guys is a little bit questionable, with guys like Brandon Graham and Milton Williams being your two rotational edge rushers, and of course Nolan Smith can also play on the outside as well. So we'll have to wait and see if that becomes an issue next year. I don't think it will, but it definitely could be. I'm more scared about the linebacking room because I just do not trust at all Nakobe Dean and Devin White. Yes, you brought in some backups like Oren Burks and Jeremiah Trotter, who I actually did like the Jeremiah Trotter hire. I had him with a 3rd or 4th round grade and he went super late in the draft, so I definitely did think that was a good pickup. Do I think he's going to be an impact player next year? It's hard to say. Hopefully he does, but I just don't know. But I just don't trust Devin White and Nakobe Dean. Again, Devin White got benched multiple times last year, and Nakobe Dean is a little bit undersized and just hasn't been able to stay healthy through his career. So I think those are my two biggest concerns on this defense. And again, looking at Vic Fangio and how he likes to run his defense, those linebackers have a lot of big time jobs to do. But let me give you guys my official synopsis of what I think this team can be next year. I'll say this. They are, in my opinion, the best team in the NFC East. The Dallas Cowboys got better in the draft, but they still have glaring issues. They don't even have a starting running back on their roster right now. Looking at the New York Giants, they still have a lot of issues on their respective team. Washington Commanders are much improved as well. I just made a video on them. I don't think they're good enough to win the NFC East though. So because of that, I think the Philadelphia Eagles are by far the favorites to win this division. I think there's a very strong chance to win the division, and I wouldn't be shocked if they end up being a very good team in the NFC. Now, are they the best team in the NFC? I'm going to say no, because I think the Detroit Lions are the best team, but I think Philadelphia is the 2nd or the 3rd best team behind San Francisco. So I think next year this is going to be a team that's going to be able to compete for championships. We'll just have to wait and see. But if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.